So welcome again to the Antelope Valley Soaring Porch Chat. And I'm Christopher Stevenson, and I run the Porch Chat for this channel and for the folks in Southern California and Central California who are soaring pilots. And we have a guest tonight who is a long-time pilot, and she's been flying since she was knee-high to a grasshopper and has worn several hats in the soaring community, everything from running her own commercial soaring center and soaring site, and then moving on and doing other things with helping the SSA and being, well, more than helping, she was on, an employee of SSA and helped when SSA was located here in Santa Monica in California. And she's just done a lot of things. I could go on for hours about the kind of involvement and things that Cindy has then provided to help keeping soaring alive and well here in California in the West. So with that, I'm going to meet these other two folks and say that in tonight's talk, she's going to talk about cross-country soaring, because that's one of the main topics here on our channel. And she is going to recount her first Dust Devil Dash flight. And with that as the backdrop, she's going to explain and help us with some insights about how not to land out and how to stay in the air and go long. So with that, Cindy, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Hi, good evening to the group. And I'm really glad you chose to tune in and listen and participate and ask questions in the AVSC's Antelope Valley Soaring Club's Porch Chats. I see that I have a typo in my opening slide. Chris has asked me to offer basic cross-country instructional information. And then I got my wires crossed when he scheduled me for this date, and I thought he wanted a personal cross-country flight story. So I've now backed up when he said, but we're doing cross-country training. And I have mangled my flight story into a training application. So for those of you who've been around soaring longer, you may enjoy how I applied the ideas that I teach into one of my own personal cross-country flights. So we'll see if
Cindy, can I just ask that you turn on video so we can see you?
Oh, you don't
okay?
you don't want to do that because
Okay.
I was
fine.
out on the ranch all day
No
and I'm grubby and dusty, and honest to God, I moved cows from a holding pen out to the far east pasture, and I dashed home at the end of the day to sit down and do this with you guys. So you don't want video.
Understood. No problem.
Let's see. How do I get? There we go. That's
there you go.
So I began flying gliders in Southern California back in 1977. And I was a typical private pilot for about 15 years. I was a club member with Southern California Soaring Association, and I had a few mentored cross-country flights in Blonics. I didn't have a great urgent drive to go cross-country myself. I was more recreational, get high and look at the beautiful view and enjoy thermaling with a couple of friends and looking at the landscape. After a period of time, I had an opportunity to make an investment, and rather than real estate, I bought an ASK 21, and I put that on lease back, and subsequently with that glider ended up running an FBO at California City and becoming a CFI glider. Then I really began understanding treating cross-country with the tools to minimize risk, to be able to fly cross-country and establish mental landmarks and simple in-cockpit mathematics that would keep me well above glide and safe for landing on airports. This was important with the ASK 21s. Even for the 20 years that I ran a glider FBO at California City, I had no trailer for those ASK 21s. We entered them in contests and flew cross countries, teaching student du jour in contests for about 18 of those years. And our requirements were that we would land on either airports or on dry lakes that were suitable dry lakes for aero retrieving, because we had no trailer. But we were talking about dust devil dashing. And if you were given a lovely glider to use to fly cross country, how careful would you be with that glider? I'm very careful with someone else's baby. So I use the same Cindy math that I teach, and I derate my anticipated glider LD to keep airports in range. And we'll talk about how that derating occurs. For this particular Dust Devil Dash, I was offered the use of a lovely sailplane and crew by the owner of that sailplane. Christian had added his glider rating with us at California City. This is a photograph of Christian's glider after one of his cross-country flights ending up on the runway at Eureka, Nevada.
Oh.
I flew at ASW 27. The contest numbers on that glider were 3-3. I went looking for an aerial photo of it, but when Christian took off and went soaring, he usually left. So I don't think I have any aerial photos of the glider that I was allowed to fly for Dust Devil Dash. What is a Dust Devil Dash for somebody who might not know? The first Saturday in September after Labor Day, the Region 12 Soaring Council organized and sponsored and publicized both the pre-event and post-event results for a straight out free distance contest that was handicapped based on the glider's performance. The takeoff place was always Tehachapi, California at Skylark North at Mountain Valley, to go as far as you could go before sunset. The contest organizer and wonderful host for many years was Rob Morgan. It's since passed on to other administrators, Ian Cant for a couple of years, and we have a new administrator now. And several soaring sites across the United States have similar once a year free distance events. Free distance events used to be very common in 1950s and into 1960s, sanctioned soaring contests, national contests. But as glider performance increased and pilots' understanding of weather systems and skills increased, it got to be uncommon to have back-to-back free distance contests. You'd have somebody fly 300 or 400 miles away from the takeoff site, and the poor crew would drive all day chasing the pilot and all night bringing them back home. And it didn't make for very well-rested or very alert pilots if we did back-to-back free distance events. So now they've become sort of a one-day celebration of how far can you really go in soaring. Kansas has a Cowbell Classic, and there's another one in Pennsylvania. But we talk about how do we keep ourselves safe for cross-country flying. And I teach mathematics that can be done in your head, in the cockpit, while you're thermaling, while you're trying to read clouds, while you're not running into somebody else, including birds. And if we talk about the typical classifications of glider performance, I was very lucky in the Dash to be using a glider that was much more than even 40-to-1 in its L over D. It's much more common for club pilots or beginning owners in soaring to have started in Schweitzer equipment, which is much closer to a 20-to-1 L over D, or single seat Grobe, Asteers, or 134s that might be in the 30-to-1 LD family. And if we talk about the differences between the German built gliders, typically 40-to-1 and better performance, their actual altitude loss in a nautical mile, and we talk about that as nautical miles because typically those airspeed indicators are calibrated in knots, their altitude loss is typically pretty close to 150 feet per nautical mile. For the 30-to-1 family of gliders, again, those are the Baby Grobes and the 134s, 135s, and they are more commonly perhaps in carrying airspeed indicators that are indicating knots of indicated airspeed. So we're still using nautical miles. We're talking a 200 foot per nautical mile loss of altitude at that basic LD of 30-to-1. In the Schweitzer family, if we knock it down to 20-to-1, those gliders are typically carrying airspeed indicators in statute miles per hour. And so we have a different denominator for our mathematics, but we still come up with a 260 foot loss per mile. It's a statute mile, and we need to keep that in mind when we're using different measuring tools. But 260 feet per mile for the 126 family of gliders. So in Cindy math, I say, let's use a fatter number, a larger number for our degraded performance. For the 40-1 glider, we'll use 75% of what the glider should give us and use 200 foot per mile. And we'll come back to this and think about it a little bit more later on when we talk about the skinny part of my cross-country flight in the dash was I using a number that gave me more or less buffer than I actually teach? And that'll be a pertinent question for a little bit later. For the 30-to-1 family of gliders, typically we're talking a lesser experienced pilot, and we bump our calculated number in flight up to 300 feet loss per mile, which is a 66% value compared to what the glider will really give us. So the glider is going to give us a little more performance. We're calculating that we're going to lose more to get to our next chosen stepping stone. And this will leave us a little extra pad for not flying coordinated, for not flying directly to the target, for not flying efficiently in speed to fly changes. If we talked about some of the training materials and your FAA private pilot written test, those references are going to say for beginning cross-country pilots, cut your performance by 50%. And you'll see that I'm not doing quite that. I'm making a derating of the performance, but not quite to the harshness of the devaluation that the FAA is indicating is prudent in private pilot initial ratings calculations. So you can see the devaluations that I've placed on the calculations that I teach. The important part is we can do mathematics in our head by multiplying 2s and 3s and 4s. I can do that multiplication on my fingers. If I say I want to go to an airport that's 10 miles away, I'm flying a 20-to-1 glider, 10 miles times 400 feet per mile is 4,000 feet of glide altitude required to get there. That's very simple mathematics. If you're using a club ship or you've just upgraded a flight computer and you aren't sure how to use it in your ASW 9000, okay? This Cindy math, this simple multiplication by 2s or 3s or 4s for the distance that you want to step off is simple enough to do in a moment in the cockpit. And you say, oh, but what about headwinds and its influence on our required spending rate per mile? Well, wind adjustment is a percentage that gets added to our basic altitude loss per mile. And we'll talk about that wind adjustment. Chris, I want to remind everybody, if they have a question, please go ahead and speak up. I'm not
Okay.
fluent enough with Zoom to be able to flip back and forth to chat. So if somebody's got a question, please open your microphone and go ahead and ask. Okay, for the Dust Devil Dash, what numbers was I using for my calculations? I'm flying an ASW 27, a beautiful glider. It's actually got a published L over D of 48 to 1 at 53 knots. If I want to make my mathematics really simple, I can say that I'll use the 30 to 1 number and 200 feet lost for every mile that I travel. So again, if I wanted to step off 10 miles at 200 feet per mile, I would need 2,000 feet of gliding altitude to spend. Does that make sense to you, Chris?
Yes, sir, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Then we said we had to think about headwinds if we were encountering headwinds on our course. If we're flying a triangular course, or very commonly in Southern California, people are flying an out and return course. So one direction or the other, you would have some headwind value. If our headwind is 10 knots and we compare that to the best LD speed for the glider that we're flying, what was the best LD for the SW27? 53 knots. So if we take a ratio of the headwind to our best LD speed, we come up with a percentage. Okay, so if I needed to add 20% for my performance degradation against a headwind, I would take my 200 feet per mile, 10% of that is only 20, 20% of that is 40, 240 feet per mile, round it up. Let's make it easy. 250 feet per mile if I have a 10 knot headwind. Or we could repeat that calculation. We could say if our headwind was 20 knots, we would need 300 feet per mile. We could figure that out, or we could have that on a cheat sheet in our side pocket in our cockpit, and we could have some headwind calculations and feet per mile calculations already printed like this to have for reference in our beginning cross countries. Now, a lot of the fellows, they've got all this stuff dialed into some fancy software, and it's spitting it out, and it's giving you colored amoebas around turn points and airports, telling you which places you can land. But I've got to tell you, garbage in, garbage out. If you put the wrong arrival buffer altitude into your software, you're not going to get there as high or as low as you thought you would. It always helps to be able to do the simple math to cross-check your electronics, not to even mention the folks who run out of battery at the end of the day, or put a battery in the glider that wasn't fully charged in the morning, and you get well out on your course and you want to keep going because it's a beautiful day and you need the flexibility to do really, really simple math of 200 feet per mile, 300 feet per mile, maybe 150. 150 is 1.5. And so it's really simple mathematics. But the real question is, when I did the Dust Devil Dash, did I follow my rules? People say, oh, you gotta be willing to hang it out there a little bit to get the big flights in. I don't believe that. I believe that I need to keep my glider safe so that I have it to fly on the next weekend's really good weather day. If I break it or prang it or bang it up, I'm not going to be able to go flying on the days that I would really like to. So I have the self-discipline to follow my own rules. So I went back and pulled up the flight file for my flight from Tehachapi to Elko. This is out of the OLC history page in 2007. If you came down here, way down here, September 9th of 2007, and you went back and you pulled up my name on that date, you could pull up and download this flight and look it over. I got no problem with that. If it's on OLC, man, it's public domain. How far did I go? Well, according to this, 700 kilometers. Well, zigging and zagging around, probably a little bit more than that. More interesting part of it is, how long did I fly? This is almost 1800 Zulu. So if we say 18 to 24, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 is 6 hours, and 25, that's 7 hours of flying for the course of the day. 7 hours of flying to go 700 kilometers gave me almost 100 kilometers an hour of ground speed. Okay? 15-meter class, and you can download that and look at this, but that's not the whole story. The statistics of the flight help us improve, help us check our own self-discipline, help us see where we made our errors, but that's not the story, the fun part about the flight. But we'll talk about the performance values. And so I've taken some CU screenshots of segments of the flight and segments of the paragraph trace so that you can see a little bit of my decision making and my cross-checking. Okay. And in these stretches of the flight, we're looking at a piece of the flight or a piece of a chart that is about 60 miles, roughly. 100 kilometers is roughly 60 miles. And we're just going to be Cindy math, not to a decimal place on this. So anywhere in the square of the piece of the flight that we're looking at, we've got about 30 miles from the south half of the picture and 30 miles from the north. So that gives you guys a little bit of scale if you're not familiar with this flying area. But this is Kelso Valley, which is a landmark, one of the first topographic landmarks coming north out of Tehachapi. And Inyokern Airport is a lovely place for a landing away from Tehachapi. Very commonly used if you fall off of the Sierras into the valley. It's about the first place that is joining the Sierra crest on the west edge of the Owens Valley. So Inyokern is a known airport, has a glider club based there, but this piece of tasking in the first 100 kilometers is basically Tehachapi to Olancha. And if we look at the barograph trace over here, the barograph trace shows some spacing between the green terrain and the blue flight trace. I didn't animate this because I wasn't sure that my software would support downloading the CU animated. So we can see that there's plenty of spacing here headed up to Olancha Peak, where I was thermaling pretty much below 13,000 feet, 10 to 13,000 feet, and never feeling very pressed by the terrain. Okay? My minimum altitude in flight on my barograph trace through here was 9,100 feet, and that happened to occur 10 miles west of Inyokern. It was actually just before I crawled up onto Owens Peak in here, was the location geographically of my low point. And at 9,100 MSL and 10 miles west of Inyokern, Inyokern Airport's, I don't know, 2,500, 3,000 feet in elevation. I've got to go 10 miles in my ASW20 or ASW27 at 200 feet per mile, not per minute. That's 2,000 feet of gliding altitude that I would spend. I'd like to arrive 1,500 feet above the airport, and the field elevation is 2,500 feet. That requires me to be at 6,000 MSL. 2 plus 1,500 is 3,500 plus 25. 35 and 25 is 6. So at a low point of 9,000 MSL, was I threatening the floor of my decision height, my buffering for having to go land at Inyokern? Not even close. I only needed to be at 6,000 and I was at 9,000 feet. I could easily continue working my way up the Sierra Crest and for quite a while fall back to Inyokern. I could fall into Cinder Cone, which is another, I don't know, 15, 18 miles north of Inyokern in here. With these kinds of altitude, it's easy enough to fall 5 or 8 miles off the crest and end up in the south end of the Owens Valley. So in the first 100 kilometers, did I keep my safety margins? Absolutely. Not even close to pushing the bottoms of them. In the second 100 kilometers, we have a little bit of a tricky step transitioning from the Sierras on the west side of the Owens to the Inyos and the Whites maybe on the east side of the Owens Valley. And we say in this second piece of cross-country flying, did we stay above the terrain on the spacing on our barograph trace out of CU? Well, no, we were pretty close to the tops of the terrain. We even flew around the sides of some of the terrain. And that's most likely this little piece coming past Lone Pine Peak. It shows Timothée Peak in here, but coming in around Lone Pine Peak, not Mount Whitney, which is up further from my, to the west and to the north of my trace and my crossing. But my minimum altitude was after I crossed the Owens. This big crevasse in here is the Owens Valley. But after I crossed the Owens, I was pretty tight on the sides and the flanks of the ridges as I'm working my way north. So if I ran my cursor across my trace on OLC or in CU, I would say that my lowest point in this next stretch was 8,800 MSL, and I was about 10 miles northeast of Lone Pine. So at that low point in this segment of the flight, did I have a safe place to land? Landing places that we have in the Owens are Lone Pine, Manzanar Strip, Independence has an airport, and even if we come further on up, we're going to come up through some farmers pasture south of Bishop maybe, but I'd much rather step from Independence Airport to Bishop Airport. But that's not quite where my flight is going to take me out the north end of this second 100-kilometer step. 8,800 MSL. Did I keep my buffer to my landing site as I transitioned the Owens and scraped my way up onto the top of the Inyos? Well, if I'm 10 miles away from the airport at 200 feet per mile, that's still the 2,000 feet plus a 1,500 foot arrival at Lone Pine. Lone Pine has only one runway. I don't know if they've mowed the glider runway recently. I might have to sequence with some airplanes that might be arriving or departing. I don't want to arrive too low and have no time to check a windsock and integrate with other traffic. And a field elevation of 35 MSL. Well, 35 and 15 is 3, 4, 5,000 plus 2,000 glide altitude. I only need 7,000 MSL to get back to Lone Pine from this low point. Did I push my limits at all? Boy, being at 8,800 MSL on the Inyos, everybody would say, you're not on top, you're low, you're scraping the sides. Yeah, I am scraping the sides in this segment of the Inyos, but I'm making steps further north. I'm getting closer to another safe place to land. And by moving north and closer to that, even at 8,800 feet, with a little bit of wind drift from the south beginning to push and bend the thermals a little bit, that's helping me get to that place. but the breezes are not really strong. This is still fairly early in the afternoon. So in this second stretch, Chris, did I push against my buffers?
A little bit.
Not
yeah.
really.
A little bit.
I only needed 7,000. I've
Yeah,
got
15, 1,800.
I've got 1,800 feet
1,800
above
feet
that.
of, yeah, you've got plenty of wiggle room.
Above a 30-to-1 glide. And what kind of a glide am I flying?
Yeah, you're flying
I'm
a much
flying a
higher
glider
performance.
that's almost 50.
Yeah.
So I'm hugely fat.
Right.
Still, even though you say, I'm not on top of the mountains, I'm not on top of the terrain. Yeah, 8,000 feet in the Owens is not high, but I'm making progress. The next 100-kilometer stretch went from the Inyos up here near Westgard Pass, I think it is, and leaps off of the high point here and angles to the northeast, headed towards Lida Junction. I've got this thing in here in the way. I can't really see this. Headed towards Lida Junction and Goldfield. Now, I knew a little bit about Goldfield because I had been a tow pilot during the Tonopah Nationals. And I had known that at that point in time, we had actually aero retrieved a couple of gliders out of that field. They said, it's not very nice. It's not perfect. It's not real smooth, but they aero towed out of it. So at least a couple of pilots in those operations had used that as an option. So this time stretch in my barograph trace, I gotta move Chris out of the way here. And in my barograph trace, we can see that I'm not as high above the terrain as I cross a couple of ridges out here. And there are a couple of places that are landable along the way that you should know about. Lida Junction is sort of a dry lake salt pan, and it actually has a pretty big dirt airport. It's not perfectly maintained because this is way backstate, Nowheresville, Nevada, but it's not rocks and bushes. There is a small ranch strip that's at the sort of the little townish thing that's called Lida. It is over here much closer to my flight track in some of this playa area out in here that's not on a ridge. And I had, as I was gliding towards Goldfield, I had seen the Lida ranch strip. It's not named, it's not charted, but glider folks that fly backstate nowhere in Nevada know about it. Okay? So here was my low point in this stretch of flying, all the way down to 7,700 MSL. And this is about 5 or 6 miles southwest of Goldfield when I finally hooked a little thermal. And when I hooked this little thermal, which way did it drift? Wow. It drifted north a lot, which turned out to be really, really helpful. But along this long glide in here, I'm busy looking at my chart and I'm calculating and I'm checking field elevations. And I am in here busily thinking that as I proceed toward Goldfield, the elevation is a lot higher there than it is down here at Lida. 1,000 feet of elevation difference is a lot of range. If I start getting hammered in this stretch, if something happens, Lida is a lot more doable simply because of its lower field elevation. Okay? With 1,000 feet of altitude in this glider that I'm flying on this particular day, that 1,000 feet buys me a lot of range. Okay? So this is just some of the landmarks in this area, but I'm not very happy that there haven't been any clouds on these peaks. And I'm not seeing anything until up towards the Tonopah neighborhood ahead of me on course line. This is a long blue hole. So at 5 miles from Goldfield, what altitude do I need? 5 miles times 2,200 feet is 1,000 feet of glide altitude plus 1,000 foot arrival. Field elevation at Goldfield of 5,700 feet. How low am I allowed to go? Whoa, this was the ticklish point in this particular flight for the whole day. And I guarantee you, I was really thinking in here, was I gonna make the turn to Lida, or was I gonna make the stretch on into Goldfield? Did I keep my minimum altitude requirements? I did.
So
7,700 feet. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, quick question. So in this scenario, your arrival altitude is a little bit less than your other chosen previous segments. Why 1,000 versus 1,500 at this time? This one.
How much traffic am I likely to find at a very lightly used dirt sort of farm strip
About 0.
versus going into some other airfield?
Right.
Who am I going to interfere with or have to integrate with traffic wise?
Pretty
The
much.
likelihood of that is much less.
Sure.
And that's an absolutely valid question. And if I had not shaved to that arrival altitude, I would not have kept my required margin.
Right. Great, thank you.
But is this 200 feet per mile, is this 1,000 foot requirement going to be used by the airplane? Am I going to use more or less or exactly that altitude loss going there?
No, I mean, you're still, that
This
200
is-
feet still gives you margin.
This is still the 30-to-1 glide ratio. And
Right.
I'm flying a glider that's supposed to give me almost 50. Yeah, almost 50. But this was my lowest point and my critical point in this long flight. And it's early in the day. This is only 300 kilometers into my afternoon on a 700-kilometer flight. But when I hooked that little baby, I needed to stay centered. I needed to not lose it. And I needed to know, was I going to fight a headwind to Lida? Or was I going to fight a headwind to Goldfield? I knew where Lida was. I had not personally looked at Goldfield other than on maps and charts. That's Goldfield.
Oh.
Many, many years ago. So, Chris, how wide is a lane of traffic?
About 11 feet, 12.
We'll say 12 feet because
Yeah,
that gives
12
us
feet.
nice round
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
Do we have another lane of traffic between the dirt road and the bushes?
Yeah, there's some little grass or something there, but it's pretty slow stuff.
But it's not sagebrush.
No, it's not.
Okay, so there's
4 foot
one
tall
lane.
bushes.
There's another lane. So if we go off the other side of this photograph of this runway,
Yeah,
how
that's
many
just-
lanes might we presume that we have on the left?
2.5 or 3.
Okay, even if it's 2,
It was just 2.
even if this is 2 lanes of traffic, and this is lane number 3, and this is lane number 4 to bushes, 4 times 12 feet is
48.
48, and I'm
Yeah.
flying a 49-foot glider. So for me, with my landing skills, I'm going to land a little bit off center and have 1 tip low and 1 tip high with its dihedral to be able to go over stuff. How tall is sagebrush typically?
Could 4 feet.
Okay, so we can look down on the lane of traffic and we can look at the width of an individual bush. Bushes are a 1-to-1 aspect ratio.
Mhm.
Trees are 1 to, I don't
10.
know, maybe 17.
Yeah.
Okay, but we can compare the size of that bush dot in flight to the size of a single lane of traffic. And that gives us an estimation of how tall the bushes are while we're in flight. Huh?
Good boots on the ground estimation, but in the air.
Pardon me?
So good.
Boots on the ground
it's
is a
boots on-
good thing,
Boots on the ground, but you're doing it in the air.
but I'm doing it in the air.
Yeah.
Comparison and scale are a huge tool to a cross-country glider pilot. So that was the ticklish moment in that particular flight. After that ticklish moment, if we take the next segment of the flight from Goldfield on beyond Tonopah on to the basin ranges to the north, I can't remember all of them, the Toyabis and a bunch of other names. It was a long time ago that I flew up there. So if we look at the spacing of the trace line versus the terrain, I don't get that close to the terrain now in this next time slot. Okay, 22:19 to 22:45. I'm not getting real close to the terrain in this stretch. And that's pretty nice. And if we even take it fairly roughly, we say, somewhere in here, somewhere probably in here, I was down to 9,000 MSL. And that was in this region. Well, at 9,000 MSL, I'm not very far from Tonopah Airport. Turns out I was only 3 miles north of Tonopah Airport at 9,000 MSL. All we need to know is field elevation to know whether or not I was happy or not so happy. Oh, come on. Did I not? There it is. 3 times 200 feet per mile only needs 6,000. Airport's 54 plus 1,000 arrival, 64. 64 and 6 is 7,000. And I'm at 9. And all of these little thermals in here that I've worked a couple of circles worth have all had a pretty good south wind pushing me. So that's going to help me. That's going to make my glides arrive higher than calculated. So I didn't really have troubles on that stretch. And finally, I was getting onto higher terrain, onto mountain chains, mountain ranges that had cloud development. Finally, this range started to have clouds again. From Wacoba to Goldfield was totally blue. The balance of the flight was stay high. I had cloud streets to follow over the mountain peaks. They weren't streets so much as they were puff lines. It was only a moderately cloudy day. And I continued running those ranges out past Eureka Airport, out to the northeast. But at Elko, or just beyond Elko, I was out of maps. And I was out of local experience beyond where I'd listened to and watched and talked and researched when I had been working as a tow pilot, preparing to retrieve people out during the Tonopah Nationals. And the clouds were quitting. And it was getting pretty late. So other decisions had to be made. I arrived at Elko, I don't know, something crazy, like 13,000 feet. And I loitered over the airport and tuned in the local frequency. Geez, in this trace, in terms of arriving, how many times did I circle over the airfield looking at things, planning and preparing to land? There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. Oh, let's look over the other shoulder. Here's 4. And I decided that I was going to land on the north runway. The other airplane traffic was using the east-westish runway, but the parking ramp was just north of the intersection on the east side of the runways. So I only need a little bit of runway as a glider pilot, and I want to end up really close to the place I'm going to use. I was going to be solo on the ground. There wasn't going to be anybody to help me. My crew was at least an hour's drive behind me, maybe more. So I radioed down to the local fellow in the traffic pattern and asked him if he could give me a hand getting off the runway after he got his fuel stopped. I stopped at a taxiway intersection adjacent to the ramp, and I only had to pull 100 feet to a tie down. The locals were very friendly. I had to wander over and use the ladies' room to change out my wet britches. I took photos around the airport, and the photos that I took started the post-flight adventure, which involved 3 cop cars and the airport manager at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night.
Oh,
And I could talk for an hour about that, but
boy.
I'm not gonna. Oh boy.
That'll be another flight story chat.
So yeah. Well, we'll do the short version of it. But here we are on the ramp, tied down, lovely 3-3. And I took a couple of photos to prove that, yes, by God, I was there before sunset. You can still see the light on the wings of the Cessna and the leading edges of the Schleicher and the hangar doors. So yeah, I was home and on the ground legally before sunset, even though I'd used up most of the day. And then I decided I needed a couple of selfies.
Mhm.
So I took a pile of stuff out and set it down in front of the glider and set up my little pocket camera that I was too busy to take pictures during the day, and set it up so that I could run back and use the time delay photo function and take a couple of pictures. And I did that a couple of times. I ran back and forth a couple of times to get a couple of pictures that I liked. And that was no big deal. And then the guys who had helped me off of the runway signed my flight documentation for the dash.
Mhm.
And so if anybody wanted to verify, did I really land there or did I not land there? I had my landing card signed off, and those were the nice fellas who had arrived in a Cessna and helped me off the runway. Yeah. We'll go back to here. And down these hangar rows off to the right, or in the photograph behind me, way off over here is the airport. Actually, that's it. That's the airport entrance gate up this hangar row. So you can see there's 5 or 6 hangars in that row, and there's an electric gate over there. So I was wandering over to the gate to find out how my crew was going to be able to get in. And the cop cars came in through that electric gate, and I moved to the right to let them go around me. And they moved to be in front of me, and I moved to the right for them to go around me, and they moved to be in front of me. And they stopped and they asked me what I was doing. And I said, well, I was going to find my gate so that I could let my car and trailer that was following me come in. And well, where did I come from? Well, I came from Southern California. Well, what airplane did I use? And I said, well, the glider over there. And that was a whole other story. The airport manager told me I couldn't land a glider on his airport because he had air carrier service there, and I couldn't bring cars on the airport. And I said, well, then you're going to have to let me carry parts of my glider out your gate. And the cops were actually decided that the airport manager was being pretty much a busybody and not very friendly representing the town of Elko. And they said, have a really great time. And I said, well, why did you guys show up? And they said, well, we had a report of someone trying to start a fire on the airport. And what it turned out was me walking over and setting the flash on my camera on time delay and running away from it, and then walking back to it and running away from it and walking back to it. Somebody saw the flash on my camera and decided that I was trying to ignite something on the airport and called it into the cops. So you can land on an airport and do everything right and still have a story to tell. So some personal notes about long cross-country flights. In my case, 2 adult diapers was not enough. Okay. So we talked about relief systems for long wave flights or long days, and I used a different solution for my long wave flights. But I did have a change of clothes in the spar storage area behind my hat in the 27. So that was good planning and let me be comfortable and clean and tidy for the rest of the weekend. I had enough food. I had enough water for a long flight, 7 hours in the cockpit. I was tired after 6 hours. And I was willing to quit, even though I was like 13,000 feet over Elko. I was willing to quit at a wonderful airport rather than compete, rather than trying to stretch on to an unknown, unseen ranch airport at dusk somewhere else. It's pretty darn easy to have your crew find you at Elko Airport. And there's food and there's motels and there's lights. It's great. But 3 hours might be saturation based on your experience as a cross-country pilot. So a 50-kilometer flight, 100-kilometer flight, 150 kilometers, doesn't matter. You get tired, land someplace nice. And it's a pleasure to be second in the Dust Devil Dash when Doug Levy in his 126 beats you. Doug landed at Luning, Nevada. He had a huge, wonderful flight, but he spent a lot of the day closer to the terrain than I did. But Doug's a great guy and he loves flying dashes and he has wonderful crew support. And it's always fun to go dashing with Doug. Didn't bother me at all that I didn't win with a 7-hour flight. Who else flew the dash that year? Quite a lot of people. And they went all over the place. Some of them went back home. There were some other people who flew some more mileage and returned to their launching point or went somewhere else. Jim Payne flew a really long day, but he was using the same kind of glider I was using, and he put in an extra hour, and he's got a lot more experience in that terrain. Okay, Dan Armstrong flew a lot, but he went back home to Mountain Valley, so he really enjoyed the Owens both ways. And same for Mark Grubb. Great pilots. It was a great day. It was a beautiful flight, and I did not risk the beautiful sailplane that I was loaned for the day. Sunday had a bonus. Driving back from Elko through Nevada, I warned Christian, who was driving the crew car. I said, if I see Mustangs, I am going to squeal like a little girl. And don't drive in the ditch just because I shriek if I see one. And about 20 minutes later, I shrieked. And we stopped and we took pictures of the Mustangs in the wild. It was quite a momentous moment for me on a Sunday. So true to the Henry Combs tradition of flying straight out and enjoying Sunday with the crew and little adventures on the way back, I had my adventure. Thank you, Christian. We're looking at little tiny horses way out here alongside the highway. It was a beautiful flight. Do we have any questions about Cindy Math or cross country or linking together several 100-kilometer flights in one afternoon? Was it a teaching moment?
I guess I've got a quickie, sort of a quickie, I guess, question. So just wondering how the day's soaring forecast, if that prediction, did that influence any of your decision making once you got in there and got going? Or did you just?
The generic soaring forecast was for light cloud markers more to the north than to the east. There was not going to be much in the way of cloud information if you went towards Las Vegas or towards Arizona. I am not as familiar with that direction towards Las Vegas or Arizona. I've gone cross country to Vegas a couple of times, and navigation is not going to be a challenge to me that way. I had not flown sailplanes to the north beyond Tonopah. So I had flown a tow plane out on retrieve duty and radio relay duty at the end of the day during the nationals up there. So I had seen some of those valleys and mountains that direction, and we had a good forecast going north. The difference was when I forked to the northeast off of the backside of the Inos, a couple of the pilots continued to go straight north up towards Reno and beyond. And they did reasonably well. I just happened to do a smidge more. So yeah, the forecast was better going northeast than east.
Okay, so you that informed you enough that you stuck to what you saw and what was informed before you took off, I guess what I'm saying.
Yep, I did.
Yeah, cool. Did your decision about that day and where and how much to I guess push yourself or whatever change because you were flying a ship that was, I don't know, maybe you were familiar with it, but it, just because it wasn't your ship. I mean, you were saying at the beginning that you made, good common sense decision to make sure, you had a safe flight and you didn't hurt yourself with the glider. But did you fly a little more conservative? I guess is what I was asking.
Well, you see that in the calculations that
Right.
I made or that I chose in terms of using 200 feet per mile.
Right,
and, if you come back to way back to the beginning and
Right.
you say, what's the L over D on the SW27? 48-1. And I was flying calculations of 30-1. So
Yeah.
that's still about a 60% value of
Right.
performance versus what the glider is really going to give me.
Yeah.
So I'm still flying the kinds of margins that are close to what a very beginning cross-country pilot should use. And yet my skills of navigation and my skills of landing precision and hopefully weather awareness are a bit more developed than a first-time cross-country pilot. Okay. So I'm still flying. Did I follow my rules? Yes, I'm still flying according to my cross-country rules. If I owned the glider, would I maybe have accepted a 150 feet per mile altitude loss to calculate? Maybe. I'd have to have pretty strong motivation for that. And what motivation am I going to have? Is my personal motivation to set a record? Is it to set a badge accomplishment? Is it to compete in a sanctioned contest? Those are choices that the individual pilot has to make. Is it my glider solely owned by me? If I break my toy, that's my loss.
Yeah.
But if I break my toy, that's also a loss that is suffered by the insurance pool across sailplane owners across the entire United States. So I'm sensitive to that. And I was in a position for a while where my livelihood, my business depended on being able to be insured for liability, whole value if I chose it. And if insurance claims continue their trend, we've had some issues of insurance coverage declining to cover older pilots, declining to cover extremely high value sailplanes, or only for a proportion of that value. So I follow these rules to ensure my own safety, my own health and well-being, for the love of my family and my friends. I don't want Soaring to end up on the front of any newspaper for having broken a glider in the bushes somewhere. Okay, it's perfectly okay in my mind to have an outlanding story of, yep, somebody landed at the 7R Ranch in Fish Lake, Nevada, and we thought it was a glider crash, and the emergency EMS guys all responded, and we discovered that it was just an outlanding. And so we all had, soda pop and iced tea under the ranchers' alfalfa sprinklers. That's an okay newspaper article, okay? But not breakage.
Yeah.
So yeah, I teach this and I follow it. And I think if a student is particularly astute, they could pull the files on their instructors and take a look to see, do people practice what they preach? And I try to.
Yeah, great. That's a great story, and really appreciate. It's somewhat, well, I wouldn't say it's refresher, but it's some constant reminders, I guess is a good way to put it, for me as a new cross country pilot, of doing the simple Cindy
Yep.
math. And I mean, I was doing that just a couple weekends ago when I hit a great thermal right off the toe, and I got up to 11.5, and it's like, okay, I'm going to San Antonio, Mount San Antonio. And, so, well, wait a minute, how far is that now? Okay, where's the aqueduct? The aqueduct's 5 miles. Okay, I need that many, X number of feet. And I had it all, started doing all those numbers in my head. And I said, okay, I think I've got it. It looks like I should be able to get there. And, with the hope that I'll, catch another thermal on the way. And of course, that didn't happen. So I had to, turn around, hightail it, but I got about halfway to Whitewood. And then, again, we're doing the math and looking at my, altimeter and going, okay, I'm not getting any, I'm going down. I'm not hitting any thermals. I guess I'm turning around because I have to. So I was just doing that simple Cindy math, flying the 134. So it just makes life simpler. And when you've got to think about 15 things at once in a glider, it's great to be able to do that just in your head without putting your head into knots.
Good. And there's a nice note in the chat. I think this is, I'm not sure who this is. Jonathan down at Warner Springs.
Yeah.
And says that he was helping an owner with a glider that had an in-op computer, and so they were using miles per 1,000 feet. And it's absolutely correct. It's absolutely valid. I just think of it the other way around. I think that I have to climb the ladder and achieve X number of altitude to be able to step off to the next place. So mentally I say, if I want to get to Fox Field and that's 10 miles away from me, I need 10 times 200 feet per mile, or 10 times 300 feet per mile. And that allows me to say, am I high enough on the ladder to go there? And to me, that's an easier way for a beginning pilot to decide whether you go from one lily pad to the next lily pad when you leap. And but either way is totally valid mathematically, as long as the person understands what they're calculating, and as long as they can locate themselves on their charts correctly,
right,
to know what that distance is to the next place. You might have an electric gizmo that measures distance to a selected turn point or a landing point, but please have a chart in the cockpit with you in case the FAA comes to have a conversation.
Absolutely.
So anyhow, I'm really glad that we had some friends that I haven't seen lately or talked with regularly that joined us for the evening. And like I said, I'm happy to have any other questions if anybody wants to ask.
This is Buzz.
Go ahead,
Hi,
Buzz.
Buzz.
Yeah, hi there. So Cindy, I was listening to your, story, and hold on a second. My dog is kind of a UPS person, just delivered a gas strut for my glider top, and I'm happy about that. But anyway, if you're in Tonopah, 20 miles south of Tonopah is a hot springs out in the middle of nowhere. And the Mustangs come in there every evening and every morning, and you'll see so many of them, and they let you get within about 50 feet of them. And while you're sitting there in the hot springs, they're coming up and drinking the water that comes out of the hot springs, and they're drinking water. And but anyway, do put that on the map if you're ever in Tonopah. 20 miles due south.
That's
on the way to Golden.
That's wonderful, because I was there for the nationals, and the guys would go out in a cub in the morning and tootle around and see if they could find some to follow around for a little bit, not to harass them, but to view them. And I went out a couple of mornings with the fellas and saw nothing, and was horrifically disappointed. And Tonopah is just a little beyond my regular commuting range, but thank you for that. And yes, the Mustangs that Christian and I saw were right alongside the highway within a few hundred yards. And one was standing by herself as the others moved away. And I said, that's totally unusual and wrong behavior. And we got out of the car and wandered down to look. Well, let me see. And it was a mare standing and shading her baby. And the baby couldn't move as fast as, there's the photograph. The baby couldn't move as fast as the mama or as the herd. And so it was going to take them longer to get to the watering hole for the day. And the path that they had worn in their normal daily commute was deeper than knee deep on the mama horse. Okay. And so that's one of the things about soaring that is still magnificent to me many decades after beginning, is the views and the vistas and the encounters that we can have with nature, with the vegetation, with the plant and animal life. We get to go to some beautiful and remote places in the countryside. We get to have arching vistas from in flight that other people never get to see. And that's what makes me want to keep soaring safe, so that we can all continue to enjoy the beauty of the country that we fly over.
Yeah, ditto that, Cindy. It's we are really lucky to be able to fly in some amazing countryscape around California in general. And so just thank you so much for your continued support with the soaring community and your amazing skilled knowledge and history and everything that you bring to the table for us new soaring pilots and for people who have been around for a while. There's always a moment to learn something new, and that's something that we all should keep in mind. You can always, I think every flight you should say, what did they learn new today on this flight today? So again, thank you so much for joining in. I do apologize for twisting your brain a little bit at the last minute there with some communication staff.
A flight story or a teaching episode. So we put them together.
Yeah, go ahead, Buzz.
Just to sort of like heighten your appetite for like getting started on this season. Tomorrow there is a wave flight. Did you see Morgan's wave flight out of Avenal just last week?
Yeah, it was amazing.
Tomorrow Kimpton's gonna up that one. Annie, he's got an amazing way more than 1,000 kilometer flight planned for tomorrow, and he'll start with wave out of Avenal and then transition to the Sierras. Anyway, he's already put it out in an email what he's planning to do, and people are going to be on their edge of their seats tomorrow watching this real time. So
nice.
You might want to kind of dial in and check that out.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the heads up on that, Buzz.
Thank you, Buzz. I'll say that the lenticulars out of my back porch have been nonstop this is the 5th day,
Yeah.
5 days
Yeah.
running,
Wow.
Yeah.
5 days running.
Wow.
Today was awesome. Even over the Bay Area, we had these spectacular lenticular clouds.
Ooh.
I mean, spectacular. And it just shows you there's a lot of energy up there.
There sure is.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
Cool. Great.
Okay, keep logging on and sharing.
Yep. Okay, well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining in to the Porch Chat tonight. And just as a reminder, this has been recorded, so that way I will put this up on the AVSC channel on YouTube. You don't really have to find the channel, just go on, open up YouTube, and then just type in the words AVSC Porch Chat, and anything that's been posted up there will pop right up. And please do, look at them again and do the whole thumbs up and the like and subscribe, of course. And for next time
Bring
around,
more people to Waterport.
yeah, bring people to the Waterport. Yeah, please bring some young folks to the Waterport. And for 2 weeks from now, one of our also skilled and fairly long time pilots, Maciek Magwecki, this year, or just was it spring or summer of last year, he bought himself a Ventus, a used Ventus, and he's going to talk about that experience of transitioning from, the pretty good performance ship to a higher performance ship, and what that was like, and what he's learned from that kind of a transition in his gliding career. So please join us in 2 weeks for that. And in the meanwhile, please stay safe, fly safe, and enjoy the beautiful soaring in Southern California. And have a good night and rest of your week, and enjoy the weekend. Take care, everybody.
can I just ask one question, Cindy? Where
yeah.
are you these days? I get asked all the time, where are you?
My mailing address is Mojave. I live between Mojave and Roseville.